It's Wednesday, June 18th, 2025, and we have an enhanced risk of severe weather starting in southeastern Missouri, going up into the Great Lakes region and encompassing the entire state of Indiana. Then we have a slight risk of severe weather stretching from the southern plains all the way up into the Great Lakes region. Then we have a couple of interesting marginals, one up here in the northern plains, then one out here in the mid-Atlantic, and then of course another one surrounding our main risk area. This is another day where it looks like the main threat is going to be damaging winds. We have a 30% moderate risk of severe winds out here in our enhanced risk area stretching from southeastern Missouri all the way up into southern Michigan. And then we have a 50% slight risk of severe winds stretching most of our entire risk area starting in the southern plains and going up all the way into the Great Lakes region. Then we have a couple of 5% marginal risk of severe winds out here in the northern plains, one in the mid-Atlantic and one surrounding our main risk area. And then there's also the possibility for large hail today. We have a 15% slight risk of large hail stretching down from the southern plains all the way up into the Midwest. And then lastly, we have a 5% slight risk of tornadoes up here on our main risk area stretching from southern Indiana all the way up into southern Michigan. Then we have a larger 2% marginal risk of tornadoes extending down from the southern plains all the way up into the Great Lakes region. Now, this is a interesting forecast, and I think we can expect it to see it to change a little bit more as we move forward into the day. Then our day 2 outlook seems to be highlighting the mid-Atlantic all the way up into the northeast. Then we have a couple of marginal risk of severe weather out here in the northern United States. This day looks like it could bring all hazards of severe weather as well. Then our day 3 convective outlook is mainly highlighting the northern United States. Here is our simulated reflectivity from this morning from the HRRR, and as we can see here, we have a mesoscale convective system that's going to move northeastward, and this is going to be our main cause of weather today. It's expected to redevelop in the morning hours, aided by troughing and the low-level jet. And what we see here is that these storms initiate really early, probably too early for them to really reach their maximum potential. And they're also in a very linear mode, so that really diminishes the threat for tornadoes and large hail and really is indicative of a mostly wind threat. Of course, because of ample deep level shear and our fronts sort of creating this shape with our warm front up here and our cold front back here, we definitely do have enough ingredients to get a couple of rotating storms out here. But it looks like the tornado threat with this main area of concern, or what looked like would be the main area of concern, is really going to be diminished throughout the day as it's just going to be too messy and too linear, and it's going to bring that more robust threat for severe winds than anything. But I definitely wouldn't rule out a couple of spin-up tornadoes along this line out here in this region, as the ingredients are still pretty favorable. It's just mostly a linear mode. But a couple of areas that do catch my eye more than others are a storm that's expected to fire up here and that's expected to move into eastern Michigan. Right here is a boundary, and it looks like this storm is kind of attached to this boundary. And when storms do that, they can definitely rotate more and have a greater potential to produce all hazards of severe weather, including tornadoes. So if any cells can kind of fire up along this boundary before this line reaches this area, it's definitely an area to look at around midday to early afternoon. And also in the early afternoon, we see in the more broken segment in the more southerly parts of this line, we get a couple of rotating storms, and the ingredients in front of these storms will actually be quite favorable for all severe hazards of weather, and also including the fact that the nature of these storms is going to be more likely to be embedded supercells down here instead of just a straight line. And then another area that catches my eye specifically is as we go into the night hours, the low-level jet is expected to kick in across the region, and we're expected to get some more storms bubble up here along our cold front. And other than the deep layers shear being somewhat weaker back here, these storms are actually going to have a pretty decent environment. So back here into eastern Oklahoma and northeastern Arkansas, I could definitely see a elevated tornado threat along the evening hours. And of course, that's going to be coupled with a pretty persistent wind threat pushing all the way through our Midwest region. Here are the upper air dynamics today, and this will give us more of an insight on where that large scale forcing is coming from. Out here, we can see some trough ejection in the mid-Atlantic. That's going to be cause for the storms in this area, but our main weather causer is going to be this big short wave dipping down into the central to southern United States. And as we can see, it actually ejects pretty early. Around late morning to midday, we get a big ejection right here. And this is one of the reasons why storms are kind of firing so much earlier than we expected. And also another reason for that more linear mode. And that's one of the big reasons for our storms out here today. And as we move through the day, using our straight jet theory, we see more lift up here in our left front quadrant and our right back quadrant. So that's one of the reasons why storms back here are definitely looking kind of interesting as we go into the night hours out here in northeastern Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma. And also one of the reasons why that wind threat is expected to persist out here in the Midwest. And another thing that's going to sustain these storms for so long and keep them making that persistent wind threat is these are 700 millibar winds, and we can see how well they're pushing into what's going to be that MCS out here, continuing to fuel it as it pushes eastward or northeastward into the Midwest. Here's a sounding from our main risk area today up here in the greater Midwest. And as we can see, our hodograph, it does have some curvature, but it's definitely not something super concerning. But we do see we have very low level helicity. We don't have much of any low level shear, but if these storms could kind of get closer to that boundary or even latch onto a boundary, that could change and that tornado threat would absolutely ramp up. We do, however, see definitely enough deep layer shear for these storms to organize. We also see quite a bit of cape to feel these storms, so definitely a juiced up atmosphere today. We see heaps of precipitable water, so one of the reasons why these storms are going to be so messy, wet, and probably more outflow dominant. And our downdraft cape isn't super high, but definitely another reason why that wind threat is going to be more prevalent today. We see some veering in the winds, which is going to help to spin and organize those storms. Our lowest cloud level is definitely low enough to support that tornado threat. Our lapse rates, however, are not super great at 6.8 Celsius decreasing per kilometer. However, our low level lapse rates are quite solid, which could definitely increase that threat for high damaging winds and tornadoes. We also see quite a bit of cape right here near our freezing level, so that threat for large hail could also be supported with those more organized storms. We see deep moisture, which could also support that threat for all hazards of severe weather and keep those storms organized and going for a much longer time. We see a teeny bit of drier loft helping with that lifting and possibly increasing the speed of those downdrafts and less winds. And also we see a very unstable 3 cape, so definitely a unstable environment near the surface. So that could also support that threat for tornadoes, but it's going to be mostly a linear mode. So the main threat is going to be QOCS spin up tornadoes. So in summary, I definitely see a couple of QOCS spin up tornadoes along that line and the threats for damaging winds and possibly even large hail. But the threat for large hail is a little iffy because our lapse rates are going to be quite low in the mid levels. Here's a sounding from mid-afternoon near lower parts of our main line. And as we can see, our hodograph is immediately going to be quite a bit more conducive for an all hazards threat, including tornadoes. Our low level helicity is going to be nearing 200, so that's quite good. Our low level shear is going to be over that 20 knot threshold, so that's pretty good as well. And then our bulk shear is going to be over that 40 knot threshold at 47 knots. So these storms are going to be organized and have sufficient low level shear, so definitely posing that threat for all hazards of severe weather. Our winds have some veering, which is going to help to spin and organize those updrafts. Our lowest cloud level is also going to be low enough to support that threat for tornadoes. Our lower lapse rates are definitely going to still be okay, but they're not as good as we saw up near the low and warm front. Our mid-level lapse rates are going to be better than we saw up near the low and the warm front. And then we have a decent bit of cape right here near our freezing level, which could support that threat for large hail. We see definitely enough moisture for these storms to produce all hazards of severe weather and sustain themselves for a long time. We see more drier loft helping to support that wind threat and provide lift for these storms. We see definitely enough cape for this region. We see over 3,500. We also see a unstable environment near the surface, which could also help support that tornado threat. Our precipitable water is going to be 1.82 inches, so definitely stronger downdrafts and very wet storms, possibly becoming outflow dominant kind of quicker and having a shorter window to produce tornadoes. And our downdraft cape is going to be nearing 1,000. So one of the reasons why we're expecting that severe wind threat out here. So all in all, definitely the threat for all hazards is going to be supported in the early afternoon in the more southerly parts of our main line, so in Indiana. Then our last sounding is going to be more in our southern plains to northeastern Arkansas risk area, around when that low level jet is expected to start to kick in. Our hodograph, we see some curving, but we also see lower deep layer shear, but we see over 200 surface helicity and 31 knots of low level shear. So definitely enough to support that tornado threat. And then our deep layer shear, it's not above that 40 knot threshold, but it's pretty close. So these storms would definitely still be able to organize. We see some veering in our winds, although not as much as we did see in our other soundings, but definitely enough to help organize those storms. Our lowest cloud levels are going to be low enough to support that tornado threat our low level lapse rates are kind of starting to decrease, and that's where we see that cap kind of increase, but I don't really think it's enough to be super detrimental. These storms out here, our mid-level lapse rate is going to be 7.2 Celsius decreasing per kilometer, along with a decent bit of cape up here near our freezing level. So definitely that threat for hail with these storms. We see over 70 dew points, so enough to produce that all hazards threat of severe weather, as long as enough moisture to also sustain these storms for quite a while until it looks like they'll get undercut by that cold front. And then we have some drier loft helping to produce that wind threat and provide lift for these storms. Now, our cape out here is going to be lower, around 2,000 joules per kilogram, but definitely still enough to support storms. Then our 3 cape, so our cape near the surface is still going to be nearing 100, so definitely enough to support that tornado threat. Then our precipitable water is going to be 1.68 inches, so enough to possibly increase that wind threat, and these storms could also become outflow dominant quicker. Then our downdraft cape is not something crazy, so the wind threat with these storms is not going to be as large. So in summary, this is definitely a sounding that could support all hazards of severe weather down in our southern plains to northeastern Arkansas risk area.